why you're feeling stuck with your guitar solos and how to fix it. So, when it comes to feeling stuck in your guitar solos, I find that there are 4 different problems that people typically have. So, let's go over those problems and then we're going to go over each of the different ways to fix them in hopefully what is the easiest and simplest method. The first problem that I find most people have, which is causing them to feel stuck in their guitar solos, is, you've heard me say it before, drum roll, rhythm. Rhythm is by far and away the most common and biggest problem that people have when it comes to feeling stuck in their guitar solos. If you don't have your stuff together when it comes to rhythm, you could have every single one of the other aspects that I'm about to talk about 100% down, and your solos are going to be extremely limited, and actually they're just not going to sound good if your rhythm's not good. Just straight up, they're just not going to sound good. Rhythm is also the most important one, as in you can get away with not having a lot of the other things I'm about to talk about, but if your rhythm is really good, then you're going to be like at least 90% of the way there to playing really, really good sounding guitar solos. So rhythm, rhythm, rhythm. Now, how do we fix our rhythm? The way that we fix our rhythm is very simple. We need to do rhythmic exercises and rhythmic improvisation while stripping away all of the information when it comes to notes. So this was a big realization that I made when I realized that my rhythm was total freaking crap, which is that, wait a second, drummers, they spend a lot of time working on only rhythm. There's a lot of drummers walking around who don't know a lick about anything having to do with music theory or notes, but they have fantastic rhythm and they're able to do their job. Now, there's a lot of really good drummers too who do know their stuff when it comes to playing piano, and they know about chords and all that kind of stuff. And that's really what you want to be if you're a drummer, but rhythm still supersedes all. And I thought to myself, well, wait a second. Well, drummers, they spend time practicing only rhythm. And then I thought to myself, well, wait a second. Do I ever do that? No. Wait a second. I'm a guitar player. I'm always trying to play chords, and I'm learning scales, and I'm learning chord progressions, and I'm memorizing the melodies of songs. But when do I ever just practice rhythm by itself? And so one thing that you should definitely check out is, I'll link it below, is the ultimate rhythm exercise, which I've talked about many times. That is a fantastic starting point to address the problems with your rhythmic execution and rhythmic selection. But just besides that, okay, one of the most important things you could do, make sure that you're practicing with a metronome, just like everything that you're practicing. If you're practicing some kind of song or some kind of riff, or practicing your scales, okay, let's say you're practicing your pentatonic scale and you're improvising, well, make sure you practice it with a metronome, even if it's really slow. And then on top of that, just to get some more creativity in there, make sure you practice with different rhythmic subdivisions. Don't always play the exact same rhythm. Like, don't always play quarter notes. You need to be able to play quarter notes before you can play a lot of other rhythms. But if you can, start playing some other rhythms. Like, if we actually take one of the rhythm cells from the ultimate rhythm exercise, which I've shown you guys before, this is a cool rhythm cell, which is like ba 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 ba. So 1E and a 2E, a 3, a 4, 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E. So I might practice my scale like this. Or I might practice my scale like this. And of course, if you're not comfortable playing through different notes like this, like I said earlier, just strip away completely all of the note information. And that's what we do in the ultimate rhythm exercise is we just say, let's practice this with one note. So again, it's just the general idea to make sure that you're practicing your rhythm by itself and then adding the notes back in. Sometimes it's just too much to deal with notes and rhythm at the same time. So the second common problem that people have with their playing is their technique. And to me, rhythm and technique actually go hand in hand, because if your technique is limited, well, it's going to limit your ability to execute rhythms correctly. And then vice versa, if your rhythm is bad, it's also going to limit your ability to develop your technique, because one of the main ways that we have to develop our technique is by playing with good rhythm and playing in time with a source of time like a metronome or with a backing track. So what is the easiest way or simplest way to improve our technique? What I like to tell people is essentially practice the stuff that you actually know already diligently enough and practice it for speed. So for example, if we go back to that same A minor pentatonic box pattern there, well, yeah, I could play it like this with just quarter notes. And that's a fantastic starting point, but I need to push myself. Just kind of like if any of you go to the gym and lift weights, when you first start out, you lift weights with a really light weight, and all you're doing is learning how to execute the form of the exercise. So when we're at this stage, like I said, we are just essentially learning the form, so to speak. We're learning, okay, my pick has to go this direction. I'm going to alternate pick. By the way, a good starting place is to get your alternate picking down and then move on to implementing hammer-ons and pull-offs, which you can do for basically anything that you play. You can play it either alternate picked or using hammer-ons and pull-offs. But then, okay, once you've got that form down, well, don't just stop there. You have to actually push yourself, and to use another weightlifting term, something called progressive overload. So progressive overload just means over time, making sure that I'm playing faster and faster and faster and faster, and actually pushing myself and not just sticking in my comfort zone. So to speed up a little bit, we'll play at the same tempo. By the way, this is that 90 BPM metronome I'm playing here. So what I would do is say, okay, let's say I can play eighth notes at this tempo. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Fantastic. So you can do that 5 times in a row minimum. So you should hold yourself to a standard of, not only do I have to be able to play something perfectly, but I need to be able to do it several times in a row before I allow myself to speed up. So let's say I play that 5 times in a row. Then I'm going to speed up, but slightly. So I'm going to speed up now from 90 to 100 BPM. And I'm going to keep rinsing, repeating that process. Now, so some of you probably already know this, rinsing, repeating, speeding up, speeding up, speeding up gradually. So you need to be able to play at a certain tempo, get it faster by 10 BPM each time, if not even slower, actually like 5 BPM every time. When we're improving our technique and our speed, it's essentially like tricking ourselves into learning how to play faster. The idea is you're playing just a teensy weensy bit faster so that your brain almost can't tell that you're even playing faster, but you are, and you stack up those little changes over time. So here's the thing that you're not going to hear most people tell you, though. You should also practice improvising at the speed that you can pick through the scale. So, for example, if I can play this at 100 now, I need to be able to improvise so that it actually translates over to my soloing, because sometimes people can play these exercises over and over and then it still doesn't translate to their soloing. So we need to improvise, essentially doing the same thing. We're going to play a chain of notes, but I'm going to rearrange and reorder and not play the scale just up and down. So maybe something like this. So I need to be able to do that at every tempo that I'm comfortable with just playing the scale up and down. I should also be comfortable rearranging the notes in that scale, because the whole entire point of learning scales is that it is a set of notes that sounds good together that we can actually make music from. The point of it isn't just to play up and down. That's what I used to think when I was a kid, when I first kind of learned scales. That's all I just saw, stuff playing scales up and down. Oh, okay, it gets your technique better. But you need to be able to actually play a freaking solo with the scale. That's the one thing I didn't understand until like years later. So make sure you're pushing yourself. And most of you, I would say a good goal, if you can't do it already, is to be able to play eighth notes with a metronome with either the major scale or the minor pentatonic scale. By the way, you should be able to do this with all your different positions or any way that you've learned how to play the scale. You should be able to play eighth notes at least like 150 to 160 BPM. If you want to get to a really, really, really high level of technique, well, you should be able to do it at least 200, if not north of that. So I'm going to jump up way in the tempo, and let's see if I can do this. This would be 200. And then I should be able to improvise, changing the order of the notes around. Right? So see how I can not just play the scale up and down, but then I'm also practicing my improv with it. So then when I actually encounter a piece of music where I got to play that speed and I got to actually solo at that speed, well, then I can actually, get by. If you want to get to sort of elite level of speed, you should go faster, up to like 300 BPM with eighth notes. Or at that point, by the way, you can half the tempo to like 100 beats per minute and play 16th notes. So actually, eighth notes at 200 is the same thing as 16th notes at 100. So like, for example, here's back at 100, but 1 E end to 2 E end to 3 E end to 4 E end to... Right, so I would probably start practicing at 16th notes at that point. It's actually a little bit different to think about it. Anyway, don't want to get stuck on this section for too long, but this is a really, really important thing. So if you have those two things that we talked about previously, rhythm and your technique, yes, your note choice and stuff like that can, not be the best and all that stuff. That's what we're about to talk about. But if you have really good rhythm and really good technique, you can get away with a lot of stuff, okay, and make it sound good. So we only got two more things left we're going to talk about. The third thing is going to be note choice. So notice how we've been going for a while, and now only finally did I finally bring up notes, okay? Because notes are important, and that's why we're bringing them up. But to me, it's only about a quarter of the picture, okay? So if we have, like I said, the rhythm and then the technique, then the notes are going to be a little bit less important. They're still very important. So if you're struggling with your note choices and maybe you feel like your rhythm and your technique is good, most people are struggling with their note choices because they're actually only thinking about scales when they're playing. So, they're playing over some kind of backing track, and then it's like, okay, all I'm going to do is play C major scale over this. So, for example, let's go ahead and we're going to put this on different screen, and I'm just going to improvise over a backing track here, and I'm going to use the C major scale. So actually the C major scale works over this backing track, but I'm going to play the scale in such a way that a lot of people do, where it's just basically randomly selecting notes from the scale, and that's about the end of the thought process. And then this is by the way, just quick tip. A lot of people always playing stepwise. And that makes it sound like a scale. So I'm going to play really stepwise and just kind of randomly scaly up and down. You're going to see it's not going to be that good, and then we'll talk about how to fix this. Sound that good. First of all, actually, I am playing decent rhythm. I'm playing eighth notes. They're happening. But it's a lot of really just randomly meandering through the scale, and it doesn't sound like that good of a solo. So what we need to do is we need to actually learn the chord tones of the chord progression that we're playing over, and this will tremendously help us to not only not sound like we're playing scales, but actually have better note selection. So this chord progression here actually just has two chords. It's a D minor chord and then a G chord. It's just D minor and G over and over again. So I want to know where all of my notes from a D minor chord and a G chord are. Now, this is something I've talked about in a lot of videos, so I'm not going to get into a gigantic tangent about this. But for example, just a little teensy weensy sample here would be, here's a D minor chord. So when I'm on that D minor chord, I want to make sure that I'm sort of emphasizing these notes more so than the other notes that are in the key. There's a D minor chord, by the way, found in the key of C major. That's why some of you might be confused, because I'm telling you it's in the key of C major, but where's the freaking C major chord? Believe it or not, it's actually just a 2-5 progression. 2 and 5, 2 and 5. It could be in the key of C major, but not even have a C major chord. So you D minor chord. First of all, I want to be able to use all of the notes that are in the key. However, a good way to learn and emphasize the notes or the chords is just play a solo with only the notes and the chords, and then add back in the other stuff afterwards. So here would be a D minor arpeggio, and then actually right next to that, this would be this B, D, and G. That would actually be a G major arpeggio. And then around that, we have other notes too that are in the key. There's all these different notes that are in the key of C major. And again, I've made other videos that get more into depth on this, but this is sort of the idea, is learning how to use the arpeggios, aka the chord tones from the chord progression, and then adding in the other notes from the key so that we can emphasize those a little bit more. And I have a more informed way of actually selecting my notes. So let's see what it sounds like if I use nothing but arpeggio notes first, and then I'll add in the rest of the notes from the key afterwards. So I'm going to use some other ones. So that would be only the arpeggio notes. I could slid into them a couple of times, but so you can tell now it doesn't really sound like a scale anymore. Well, because I'm not playing the scale. But now I'm gonna use the other notes that are in the key, but I'm gonna emphasize more those chord tones. And maybe sometimes I will just straight up play an arpeggio. As you can see, of course, I'm also using some other rhythmic selections there. I'm using some 16th notes, a 1E and a 2E and even some 16th note triplets. So that stems a lot from what we were talking about before, rhythm and technique. And again, the notes are important, but they're a little bit more secondary. But we're going to move on from that section. That's the takeaway. Learn the heck out of your freaking arpeggios and then the notes that are in the key. And then finally, the last thing we're going to talk about is phrasing and musicality, okay? So phrasing really leads to having musicality. So what is phrasing? Phrasing is, simply put, in my eyes, it has a lot of different elements, but the most simple way of thinking about it to me is where you're playing and where you're not playing, aka how much space are you leaving? And it also has a lot to do with rhythm, because rhythm has to do with time, and phrasing also has to do with time, but just we're kind of thinking in a bigger picture. So some different phrasing exercises that would help fix your phrasing are super duper simple, okay? And let's go over a couple of them right now. So the first phrasing exercise that I like to do is thinking about long and short phrases. Very simple. So I'm going to play a solo right now, and I'm going to play nothing but short phrases. Again, phrasing, it's kind of like talking, right? People have different phrasing when they talk. Some people talk really slow and drawn out. Some people talk really fast and it's hard to understand all the different words that they're saying. And on top of that, they don't use periods or commas in their sentences. So we want to have a nice kind of variety of phrasing. And by practicing these exercises, it really helps you hone in on your own style and what kind of phrasing you like to have in your solo. So let's start off with nothing but short phrases. Again, now I'm not really worried about anything else other than I want to play short phrases. I don't care if I play wrong notes. Dare I say I don't even necessarily care if I play wrong rhythms. I do. I want to play right rhythms. But still, all I want to focus on is playing short phrases and leaving some space too. So there's short phrases. What if now I play nothing but long phrases? So that was a pretty long phrase. I'll leave some space. Another long phrase. And of course, long phrases, they kind of are a little bit more difficult because the longer you're playing for, the more likely you might be to get tripped up by, a flubbed note or something like that. And that's where, again, having the rhythm and the technique does come in handy so that we can have more control over our phrasing. Now, last phrasing exercise is we're going to think about the space that we leave, okay? So I'm just going to try to mix up whether or not it's a long phrase or a short phrase. By the way, that's a good way to approach it because we don't want to have the same kind of phrasing the whole entire time. That becomes boring. But I'm going to think about now either long pauses or short pauses. Okay, so we think about how long we're playing for and how long we're not playing for. So let's do nothing but short pauses first. So that one, of course, I'm not leaving a lot of space because all of my phrases are, they're different lengths, but all of my pauses are very short. So now I can play either long or short phrase, but now I want to leave a long space in between each phrase. Let's see what happens. Lots of space, leaving all kinds of space. So I love these kinds of exercises because they get you thinking on another level. Once you get to that level, you're not so much thinking about every single little minute detail of what you're playing. You're thinking in the big picture. Just like how when you're talking to someone, you don't think about every single letter that's in every single word that you're saying, right? You think about what you're saying and how you're saying it. And that's the level that we want to get to with our soloing. And this is the level that we can get to if we actually address these 4 problems. Let's recap: the rhythm, the technique, the note choices, and then the phrasing and musicality. So if you want to learn how to master the fundamentals of the guitar fretboard so that you can learn what we were talking about earlier, all of your arpeggio notes in every single key and every single chord all over the entire guitar neck, so that you can take all the stuff that we talked about this video and apply it no matter what the context is, no matter what the key is, no matter what the chord progression is, then make sure you head on over to Jamsville.com right now and pick up your copy of the Jamsville GPS Fretboard Fundamentals course. Also, make sure you head on over to the Jamsville merch store and get yourself an awesome Jamsville t-shirt so that you can represent when you're out and about in the world. Also, make sure you check out my favorite guitar picks that I use all the time. They're called the Dan's Guitar Store Precision Pick. They have the absolute best grip that I've ever used in any pick, and on top of that, they have the best picking edge that I've ever seen in any pick. And they do not sponsor this video. I just absolutely love these picks and I want you all to get them. Also, I just came out with a new single. So if you want to hear my own music and how I apply all the stuff that I talk about in this channel, make sure you head on to the link in the description below and check out my new song. It's called My Divine. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, listen, learn, and jam.